Pauline Kael, let's be perverse, and instead of beginning by talking about movies, let's talk about television.
Okay.
I'm told that you've been watching a lot of it, or certain programs at least.
I've watched a few programs. People seem surprised at that, and so they think I'm watching more than I am. I did watch The Sopranos for its first season quite religiously. I loved it. I thought there was marvelous stuff in it, particularly Nancy Marchand. She was such a surprise in that role. But after the first season, it seemed to get rather crude and routine, and I don't have a great deal of interest left in it. I think it exceeded its interest in its publicity. It got talked about more than it deserved, maybe, in the latter appearances anyway. The West Wing is fun because I caught on at the beginning, and it's just been tremendous fun. The casting is so good, I think. The women are beautiful, and they're women who generally don't get roles as good as that. And it was fun to see Stockard Channing as the First Lady. I wish she would appear more. But all those men in the back rooms of the White House seem such perfect types. They look like the men who could be in any administration now. They're very convincing and very funny.
Do you think Martin Sheen makes a credible president? Because in a way, I imagine Martin Sheen has been running for president in his mind for a long time now.
I don't know that I would cast that aspersion on him, but he's not bad. He's such a noble, decent weakling that it's rather touching. I mean, they have made him a weak man.
You know,
The stuff with his daughter and the black aide is perhaps a bit too noble. I think they could lay off on that a little. But it's a good show. It's got more wit than any other program I know on TV at the moment, except maybe the animation shows, which I don't see. I don't have the stomach for animation.
are there sitcoms on TV that you're fond of? I know you like Sex and the City.
Sex and the City is terrific. How did they get it so good? It's newly mined material, because in the past they wouldn't have dared to put material like that on television. These girls discussing men the way men discuss women go pretty far. And there are episodes in it that really break me up that I can't get out of my mind, like the Kim Cattrall episode when she goes to bed with a very rich man who's an older man who explains to her that he knows he's old and not very appealing to a young woman, but he will take good care of her, and he gives her jewels. And they go to bed together, and he excuses himself to go to the bathroom, and she gets a view of his naked rear end, and she flees the apartment. And there's something so hysterically funny about the truth of the matter is she's a gold digger, but she's not that much of a gold digger.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just lovely. She's awfully good at it.
Are there things that television does routinely now that movies, for one reason or another, seem to be unable to do?
Well, movies did them already, so they can't do them over. Sex and the City is like a movie called Three Broadway Girls, which was also called, the French had a word for them, or the Greeks had a word for them. It was done years ago with Joan Blondell and other gold diggers, and it's the same basic material that turns up in Sex and the City.
Mm-hmm.
And you can't make a movie out of those things anymore. You can make a half-hour TV show out of them. But when people complain about movies don't do what they used to, it's because they already did it.
And we wouldn't want to see them do the same thing
No,
again, repeat it. Yeah. Maybe some
as it
people
is,
would.
I can't stand the big epics because they redo the exploitation movies of the 40s and 50s.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't go see Gladiators. I grew up on Ben-Hur and all those movies. I don't want to see them again.
Right. Well, one virtue of television has always seemed to me to be its more lenient casting in a way. I mean, here's what I'm talking about. I'm thinking of actors like John Travolta, who we both really like a lot, and Bruce Willis, Michael J. Fox, Jim Carrey, for that matter. Movie stars, people who are now movie stars, who first got noticed on television and who, for one reason or another, would not have been seen initially, at least, as leading man material in movies.
Well, that was true of earlier generations of stars, too. They often, in their first appearance, played gangsters or hoods or someone uncouth. Clark Gable at first was a villainous, uncouth bastard. Remember him in Night Nurse when Barbara Stanwyck said, looked over at the woman he'd left there on the floor drunk and said, "You mother," to the woman there. And he was a tough customer. And now they often, are more interesting playing tough guys at first. Tom Hanks didn't come up that route, but he played an oddball character. He was wonderful in Bosom Buddies on television. He's much less interesting, I think, now than he was then. Travolta is an amazing case of an actor who simply has so much truth and earnestness in him that at times you don't know whether to take him straight or not. But he's a wonderful actor. I thought his performance as Clinton in Primary Colors was really a joyous performance and a difficult one. It wasn't just a simple matter of imitation. But I've seen him do stuff in dumb movies where I couldn't believe he approached the material with such sincerity that he carried the audience along. And there's a tendency when he appears on television and talk shows for the host to patronize him a little bit because the audience takes him as not such a smart guy. Whether he's a smart guy or not, he's a wonderful actor.
Do you think Scientology has a bit to do with that? That's what they think
I think so, but they don't
guy.
patronize Tom Cruise the same way. Tom Cruise gets by with it better. He doesn't get by with it in his acting better. But Travolta is a remarkable actor. I can't think of anyone like that who's had that quality of sincerity.
Do you find yourself becoming alienated at all from popular culture?
No, because I love the energy of pop, and I miss it in classical music, and especially. I find I tend to buy more pop than classical music, which rather alarms me because my early education was all in classical music, and I'm astounded to find myself playing so much pop. But it has a bite and a life to it, and I think it's one of the reasons we love movies so much is they have that pop element. It's one of the reasons that so many plays seem deadly to audiences, that they have a refined texture to them, and they put you to sleep with all that refinement.
What have you been listening to lately?
Oh, I'm crazy about Tom Waits. It sounds absurd, but I love his CDs. And it puzzles me because the first time I heard him, which was on the soundtrack of an Altman movie, I think, or the first time I became aware of him, I was rather hostile to it. It seemed to me blurry and noisy. And now I'm really wild about him. And of course you can play CDs and read at the same time without any conflict. In that case, I tend to stop the reading and listen to the music.
Well, speaking of which, about it's interesting to see which art wins out over the other. I mean, a difference between music and movies is we're used to listening to a record over and over again at different times. And you were famous or infamous, some would say, for seeing the movies you wrote about only once.
That's right.
Now that you're here and you have,
More time.
more time, you're not filing every 2 weeks. And also now that we have video cassettes and we have cable channels and so on.
I still don't look at movies twice. It's funny. I just feel I've got it the first time. But with music, it's different. With classical music, it's just the reverse of what I've always been told. With classical music, I tend not to listen to it repetitively. But if you give me Aretha singing "A Rose is Just a Rose," I could play it all day long. And I can't explain that.
Well, do you think that it's in part seeing movies only once is a generational thing and that no one understands that? I mean, here's what I mean. In the days before repertory cinemas and video cassettes and cable movie channels and everything, a new movie came to your neighborhood, you saw it, and then it was gone. You remembered the good ones and you forgot the bad ones, but you didn't really have the chance to see them again. When you were growing up, or when I was growing up, for that matter, too.
Well, and often when you were kids, you sat and saw the next show, so you saw it twice that day, which you don't do when you grow up. But at least I don't do.
They don't let you do it now, as a matter of fact.
Oh, they clear the house.
Yeah, they clear the house, yeah.
And they make it seem as if it's for your benefit. They want you to see it from the beginning.
And they have to sweep, they have to...
But they don't sweep.
Well, they say they do. I've been chased out of movie theaters a lot for that reason.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can't explain some of these things in the arts, why different people respond so differently to the whole issue of seeing things many times. I'm still astonished when I talk to really good critics who know their stuff, who will see a film 8 or 10 or 12 times. I don't see how they can do it without hating the movie.
Mm-hmm.
I would hate it.
So you haven't broken down at all and think, well, I'm going to watch Nashville today. I can get it
No,
on cassette.
I haven't watched Nashville again. I was thinking about it because this new, what do you call it, CDV, or what are the initials?
CD-ROM or?
No.
Oh, DVD.
Yeah, DVD issue is supposed to be coming out. And because I just read an absolutely splendid article on Nashville that was downloaded from Salon on the web. It's by Ray Sawhill, and it just came out, and I think it's the best piece on movies I've read all year. And I was so excited about it. It recalled for me the excitement I felt when I wrote about Nashville 25 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
It's fun reading terrific reviews and terrific articles on movies. There aren't enough of them. Most of them seem to be on the web now, on Salon and on Slate. They have very good movie people.
Do you cruise the web, as they
I
say?
don't cruise any of those things. They get downloaded for me by friends.
I see.
I'm a mechanical idiot, and always have been. That's why I wrote by hand. It became sort of an organic process, but I think that's an excuse that I didn't want to have to learn how to operate the machinery.
Beginning with the typewriter, even?
That's right.
Okay.
I never typed. I always wrote with a pencil and wrote very fast.
As a point of curiosity, though, did you hand your copy in at the New Yorker in longhand?
Sometimes, but most of the time, my daughter or someone else would type it up.
I see.
But you could. There's no reason why you couldn't. It wouldn't make a hell of a lot of difference to the printers if you wrote legibly. And sometimes I would have it typed up but then redo it, and so it would be half longhand.
Mm-hmm. One more television question. Something I was curious about a few months ago was what you made of all the publicity surrounding Michael J. Fox's farewell appearance on Spin City.
It was a terrible show. That was the only thing that bothered me. I was hoping it would be a good show. And they publicized it so heavily. And I think a lot of people who didn't know Michael J. Fox's work watched that, and they really could get no idea of how talented he was or what good work he'd done over the years. He was a very good actor, and I felt bad about it. They didn't do him justice.
Did it bother you for the other reason of you having
Because
Parkinson's?
of my own Parkinson's? Yes. No, because I felt he was giving with it. I could feel that his body movements were dictated by the Parkinson's, and yet I could see how he worked them into the role. But I feel more upset when I see Janet Reno, because I feel she's in such a terrible, vulnerable position. And the press has so often been very unkind to her. And Parkinson's just seems like an extra blow. It seems very cruel. The press can be extraordinarily cruel about something like that. But I've heard remarks made about her on television talk shows that I can't believe I'm hearing, that people can be that grossly insensitive. But she's a remarkable woman, and there's something very gutsy about the fact she hasn't concealed it. She could have hidden her hands under desks often, or done something to disguise it, and she hasn't done that.
Mm-hmm. Well, I almost wished that instead of inventing a political scandal for Fox's character on Spin City, the script had him leaving office on account of his Parkinson's.
It would have been sensible,
honest?
Wouldn't it, since that was what we all knew.
Yeah.
I don't know why they did it that way. There were probably big backstage arguments about it. It was unfortunate. It was a very sloppy show.
Having Parkinson's, I assume, was your main reason for leaving your post as film critic for the New
That,
Yorker.
plus the fact that I couldn't say anything about some of the movies. They were just so terrible, and I'd already written about so many terrible movies. And I love writing about movies when I can discover something in them, when I can get something out of them that I can share with people. But if you're writing about how bad they are, and that week when I quit, I hadn't planned on it, but I wrote up a couple of movies, and I read what I'd written, and I was so discouraged. It was just incredibly depressing. And I thought, I've got nothing to share from this. I love the fact that I wrote about movies in the 70s when there were terrific things to write about, and wonderful directors coming along who really brought something new to the medium. And just think, I got to write about the big movies of Godard and Truffaut and Altman and Coppola, and Demi's small movies, which were wonderful, Hal Ashby's movies that people don't even talk about, like The Landlord, which was a wonderful movie. There were so many good things to deal with, and then suddenly everything we hoped for with movies went gerplooey, and a good movie marked the transition, but brought in terrible consequences. Jaws is really a terrific movie. I laughed all the way through it. I think it's a brilliant piece of work, and yet it marked something. And then with Star Wars coming on top of it, that awful Star Wars, and its successors, movies have just never been the same. All the direction we thought they were moving in, they've gone the other way, and they've become big exploitation movies. There are hardly any small movies that people go to. And some of the more interesting ones they won't go to. I love Three Kings, which I thought was probably the best American movie I saw last year, but it didn't have much of a following, even with George Clooney in the lead, and he was very good. There were very few interesting movies. There were a few little ones, like Larry Kasdan's Mumford, which got dismissed in the press, but which I thought was a charming movie and a very funny idea. When I was a kid, there was a very successful French movie starring Louis Jouvet. It was called Dr. Knock, and it was about a doctor who went to a small town and made everybody think he was sick, that they were all sick. And he treated them all very lucratively for him and left this miserable town full of sick people. Mumford is the exact opposite. A fake psychiatrist comes into a town and cures everybody. And it was so witty and charming and light. And for some strange reason, we don't go to charming, light movies anymore. People expect something to be heavy and turgid, like American Beauty. They want it to tell them something about alienation and their miseries and what rotters Americans are. So if you make a light movie about small town, they don't go. It's very tough, I think, for critics to persuade people to go see light movies. We've become a heavy-handed society.
We want movies to be good for us, to be medicinal almost in some way, you know?
Isn't that awful?
Yeah, instead of just wanting them to be pleasurable. But you know, you mentioned Jaws and you mentioned Star Wars. And one thing that obviously happened with those movies is they made so much money that the stakes just got a lot higher.
That's right. That's exactly what happened. They made inordinate amounts of money.
You once said, and I couldn't find chapter and verse here, that your aim in writing about movies was to talk about them the same way that people talked about them leaving the theater.
Yes, I wanted to use the language that we really used in talking about movies and the language of movies. I didn't want to write academic English and try to elevate movies into something they weren't. I don't think that elevation really raises them. I think it lowers them because it denies them what makes them distinctive.
Well, I remember reading that and thinking, wow, Pauline Kael really has some smart friends because, you know, the people I know leave the theater and say things like, hell, it was cute, or it was different, or it stinks, or whatever. But your first movie-going companions, I assume, were your family, your parents and your brothers?
Yeah, I saw movies on my parents' laps. My brothers and sisters went on their own. It's a big family. But I was the youngest, and so I would be on their laps for a number of years. And then by the time I was about 8, I could go with other little kids. Or with my siblings. But it was never as satisfying to them, apparently, seeing those movies as it was to me, because in later years I would remind them of some of their reactions to movies, and they didn't remember the movies at all. I was terribly let down by that. I assumed that the movies meant as much to them as they did to me, and they hadn't.
And Petaluma was farm country in those days?
It was chicken and egg country, primarily. But it had a couple of theaters, and it was a good little town. It was a great town, and it was close to San Francisco, where our parents went for music and theater. And there was a lot going on not too far away. We thought it was a desolate, dry, nothing place when we were kids, but as you get older, you realize it's not a bad town at all. Well, it was used in American Graffiti, and it's been used in a lot of other movies.
Is your grandfather worked for Levi Strauss, I understand?
That's right.
In what capacity?
He took orders for them. He had worked in Poland buying objects of art for the King of Poland. He had traveled around Europe and the Orient. He spoke a number of languages and was a very cultivated man. And it fascinates me that when he came to California, he followed his children who had all eloped and settled in California. And he went to work for Levi Strauss, which in some ways was the equivalent of working for the king.
the king of San Francisco, right? Yeah.
Yes, I heard nothing but good about Levi Strauss in the years of growing up, and I wore practically nothing but jeans.
You're listening to Pauline Kael in conversation with Francis Davis. This is City Arts and Lectures.
At the University of California in Berkeley, you majored, I believe, in philosophy.
That's right.
Was that with an eye toward becoming what, a teacher?
No, I intended to go to law school, and I did apply to Bolt Hall and was accepted. And my plan was to teach in the philosophy department while I went to law school, and everyone seemed to encourage me in these plans. And at the last minute I thought, what am I doing? I can't face law school, and I can't face more academic life. And by then I was involved with a poet, and I went off and did some writing instead. It was a liberating thing. I think it was good for me, and I've regretted it very, very little. There are times when you know you've had a belly full of the academic life.
Over the years, did you ever receive teaching offers?
Yes, a number of times when I've lectured at colleges, I've been offered teaching posts. And they're tempting sometimes because it's a way of us getting a secure living for a period of time. But I loved writing, and by then I really loved the gamble of writing, the risk-taking of it, and I loved the speed of it. I love the fact that you have your say and you get it over with and you move on to something else, because that was why I couldn't function really in Hollywood. It seemed to me you never got anything done and over with, that you would nag over the same material endlessly, discussing the various ramifications and problems. And I hated it. I'm a very fast person in temperament, and I really love the quick writing. I'm a very fast writer. And I love the fact that when you're finished with something, it's printed. A weekly is great because it's printed, you're rid of it, and you're working on something else by the time that one comes out.
You did write, I believe, radio plays early on, didn't you?
Yes, I wrote some plays that were done on radio. They weren't intended for radio. I was very regretful that one or two of them appeared on KPFA in Berkeley. I hadn't given my approval to that. But I don't think I thought then I had a gift for it, and friends of mine thought so. But in those years it was very hard to get things put on. And so they were done only as radio plays. But I think now I did not have the imaginative gift. I think I'm ideally suited for criticism, that it satisfies something in me, and I really love doing it. I think it has the right kind of creative elements for me.
When your first piece on a movie was the Chaplin piece on Limelight in
Yes.
'53?
It came out in City Lights,
Mm-hmm.
the magazine that Larry Ferlinghetti took over, but at that point it was initiated and run by Peter Martin.
Becoming a film critic, and I guess one of the things that interests me is you had worked at various other jobs. I mean, you had
Right.
written advertising copy. You had worked in a bookstore. Had you been a seamstress, I believe?
Yes, I've
Right.
done a lot. I worked as a cook.
A cook. Almost any of those jobs had more potential for actually earning a living than writing. So
Yes.
what kind of compelled you to?
I don't know, and it was insane financially or economically, I should say, for years, because I made a few $100s a year by placing pieces in magazines. They were magazines that paid almost nothing. I remember particularly the mild insult of of Amir Baraka's magazine, which paid me $2 per 1,000 words.
Culture.
Culture,
Right, yeah.
that was it. Anyway, that's what culture amounted to, $2 for a 1,000 words. And I wrote for a number of magazines that paid comparably. I mean, Partisan Review was a high-paying magazine. I got something like $64 for a long article. It was impossible to make a living at the kind of writing I was doing, particularly since I was doing it on the West Coast. And when I got assignments in New York from magazines or papers, they would often reject what I did and not pay me any kill fee because I was across the country. I wasn't likely to bump into them. I didn't even know there was such a thing as a kill fee because nobody paid me one.
Oh, they must have loved that. Yeah, a real virgin. In many of your early pieces, including the reviews that you did for radio in San Francisco, you would go after the other critics who you disagreed with, and
The New York critics.
The New York critics, right? What I found in my experience as a music critic is that among other critics, almost anything you say about a performer, or, in my case, a musician, in your case, a director or an actor, is considered fair game. It's when you attack another critic that you're seen as hitting below the belt, and you build up tremendous animosity. Do you think you build up a great deal of animosity? Did people
Yes.
read those and who is this woman? We hate her,
I was unaware of the degree of that because often I was disputing what the New York critics had said on the radio, on KPFA, and doing it as a way of alerting people to some good movies that had been put down by the New York critics. Movies that I thought would pass them by, they wouldn't pay any attention to. And movies like The Golden Coach and Fires on the Plain, the Japanese film.
Lolita.
Yes, Lolita.
A wonderful movie that I think hardly anybody else paid any attention to or liked, called The Innocents.
Yes, a wonderful
Jack
movie by
Clayton.
Jack Clayton
Yeah,
with Deborah Carr. I had a very good time praising a lot of movies and urging people to go see them. The Earrings of Madame de was one. And I didn't realize the degree to which New York critics would be angry at this upstart voice, because it didn't seem like such a big voice to me. I was just writing this for listener-sponsored radio, not being paid, and appearing because I loved writing. And they took it out on me in funny ways. For example, the idea has spread very widely that I reviewed Nashville, that I jumped the gun on people to review Nashville. And even Altman has picked that up in interviews now. He says that I reviewed it early. It was a large screening, and it was held for the purposes of getting reviews, because there was some danger the movie company was going to insist on cutting the movie. And before I wrote about it, I phoned Altman's office specifically and asked the woman who answered the phone if she would check with him and find out if he wanted it reviewed later or then. And she said, now, that's why the screenings were held. There were 3 screenings held, and there were other critics who wrote it up from the screening I was at. But I was jumped on as some unethical person who reviewed it early. And that's now become part of the culture of film. And there's no way of combating it. It's been in so many papers by now.
Yeah, I read even recently, that the film wasn't completely edited when you saw it.
What I saw was 11 minutes longer than what opened, but it was easy to see which numbers were going to be cut because there were very poor numbers. And anyway, I loved Nashville, and I'm glad I wrote about it early because I think it did it some good. But it is interesting how the critics will get back at you one way or another.
One review of yours that that I'll always remember, I'll always remember exactly when it came out even, was your review of Godard's Masculine Feminine at the end of 1966. And here's the reason I'll remember. I was in college then, and I was already interested in the French New Wave and so on. And I was dating a girl who was not interested in foreign movies and didn't like to watch movies with subtitles and so on. And your review came out in the New Republic, and we had a chemistry class together on Monday mornings. And your review made that movie so exciting that what I did, I made sure when I wasn't in my seat, the magazine would be open to your review, and she would read it. And I knew she'd want to see the movie at that point, so it became her idea to see it. So we saw it that weekend. But later I found out, I think I read you, I think you said this somewhere, that that particular review was one of the reviews that William Shawn read that convinced him to approach you for the New Yorker.
One of the reasons he hired me. Godard in general, he went to movies often. He rarely sat through a complete movie because he said or felt he couldn't stand brutality or bloodshed. So he would leave at the slightest hint of violence or violence to come. But he saw many first parts of movies. And he did go to see some Godard movies and realized there was something there. And I wrote very lovingly, I guess, about Godard. And he was very unhappy with the fact that the New Yorker had panned Godard pretty carelessly for some time.
Well, what's always surprised me, what surprised me to learn that was that review of yours of Masculine Feminine was as much about youth culture and pop culture as it was about that movie. And about that movie's, connection with youth culture.
I was often accused of writing about everything but the movie.
I didn't mean it that way.
But
anyway, I'm just surprised that this is not William Shawn's image as being very, very interested in youth culture in 1966.
He was interested in a surprising number of things. It's funny because he took very doughty attitudes to what could appear in the magazine, even though he himself was very alert and alive to things. He often argued with me about how I should not write about a particular movie because it was brutal or dirty or one thing or another. He wanted some sort of censorship imposed, but he couldn't, rigorous man that he was, impose censorship, so he tried to talk the writers into censoring themselves, and I didn't go for that. But he went to see stuff, and he had very open taste. He was quite remarkably open in what he responded to. He knew Richard Pryor from the very start of his nightclub career. He'd seen his performances. And when you consider how pristine language had to be in the New Yorker, you'll see how remarkable it is that he enjoyed listening to Richard Pryor.
Let's, as long as we're talking about William Shawn, let's tell just one or two tales out of school here, if you don't mind. Everybody.
I'll mind when I hear what you want.
No, everybody knows that you and he often argued over what he considered, say, crude language on your part.
Right.
But you told me once that he also objected to terms that he considered, filmic terms that he considered to be too technical.
Mm-hmm.
What were some of them?
I can't remember now. One of them would certainly be filmic. And I agree with him there. I see no reason for that word. What the devil does it mean anyway? But I don't recall what the others were.
I was just curious about that, and also whether he ever thought that something you said about a director or an actor was too cruel. Like, for example, when you described, I think it was Diane Cannon as looking a bit like Lauren Bacall and a bit like Jean Moreau, but the wrong bits.
She roared over that, I'm happy to say. I don't recall if he objected to that, but things like that he did object to. She's a very lively, smart woman, and she was very sweet about it. If she did object to it, she didn't indicate that to me. But he sometimes talked me out of things which I'm not sure he was right on, but I gave in because I felt maybe he was right. When I wrote Raising Cain, I didn't discuss the subsequent history of Dorothy Comingore, who played Cain's great love, because she was arrested for prostitution, and whether it was a fair arrest or not, it's often thought that it was a political bust of some sort. But there were children involved, and he thought it was wrong to get into her life after the movie was over. And so I didn't. And there are times when, you leave out things that seem part of the story you're telling because you don't want to give offense or to hurt people. And that made sense. I'm happy to say that some of the people, at least, who objected to my criticism of Shoah have since told me they agree with me now. I'm sure many don't. But I did have a rough time on that. That's the only time he held up copy. He didn't print something that I'd turned in, and I insisted that it be printed the following week, or nothing at all.
Yeah, I guess Shoah is one of those movies where if you don't like it, you're somehow being insensitive to the issue of the
That's
Holocaust.
right. And that's something that readers of the New Yorker were very sensitive about, as they were on Rain Man and other movies that involved illness. And I got a letter telling me it was wrong of me to say anything good about a Woody Allen movie in which he had a joke about a village idiot. And it was pretty much, what would you say if your son was the village idiot? That wasn't how it was put, but that was what the mother was saying.
Well, you'd almost have to be proud of him, because with all the idiots in the village, for your son to be the village idiot, I mean, just to prove I can be more insensitive
It's
than
rough,
anyone.
but there are no there are no possible butts of jokes at a certain point in movies. There's almost nobody you can make fun of.
Yeah, it seems like we've gotten rid of a lot of the taboos that, for years involving sex and violence, but they've been replaced by a whole new set of taboos, and more are being added every day.
Well, particularly the women's movement has added many taboos, and it's very tough. You can't have a dumb blonde anymore. And they were wonderful stereotypes. There were so many great stereotypes.
Right, the Franklin Pangborn.
Yeah, Franklin Pangborn was a delicious character. And I don't know what was wrong with that, but I think many people would tell me what was wrong with it.
Have you read any of the recent spate of books about the New Yorker?
Yes, I've looked at several of them. And the Ben Yagoda one is really quite good, I think. I recognized the magazine from his writing about it. I didn't recognize it from some of the other books. I mean, I was dashing into the city, turning in my copy, running out to the movies, coming back, correcting galleys, going to more movies, and then going home to write. And apparently I missed all this intrigue going on at the magazine because I knew very little about it, and what word did reach my ears, I didn't pay that much attention to. I didn't have time. I was writing. And you can't really turn in copy every week or every 2 weeks and spend all your time plotting against your fellow workers. I was absolutely astonished when the piece came out in the New York Review of Books by Renata Adler that rejected everything I'd written. I was so stunned. I had no idea this was coming, that this was building. I was told by Harold Brodkey's that a dozen or so people were in on it, that it had been a group movement to denounce me, and I knew nothing about it. I was innocently going to the movies and writing.
Beginning at the New Yorker for 12 years, you had the 6 months on, 6 months off arrangement. I wondered, during that time, during your 6 months off, was it ever suggested to you by Sean or anybody else that you could do other sorts of pieces? You could do more pieces along the lines of the Cary Grant piece, or
It was tricky. I had to go out and make a living for 6 months of the year. I didn't have the comfort of sitting at home writing a long piece. I had to go out teach somewhere generally, because if I wrote about the new movies, it would be in conflict with what was being said in the New Yorker. And so I would go out generally to UCLA, and I would spend a couple months teaching there and then teach elsewhere. A few times I worked on pieces for part of the time that I was unhappy with and threw out. I tried to write about television once, and I tried very hard. I worked on a piece for several weeks, and it was just awful. Television is so hard to write about. I think that Jim Wolcott was one of the few people who licked that. I just couldn't. Maybe if I'd written about it week by week, I could have gotten the hang of it. But writing a big piece on television was a nightmare. It was just crap, and I threw it out. I'm not that easy at adapting to some other subject field, because I was keeping up with movies and tormented by the ones I couldn't write about that I wanted to write about. I'd love to have written more about eroticism on the screen. I think it's a great subject. It was tough to write about it at all with Sean. When I wrote about the Marco Ferreri version of Charles Bukowski, I had a real tough time with him. The one about the girl who's virtually a mermaid. What is the name of that now? Tales of Ordinary Madness.
oh,
Ben
is that? See, I haven't
Gazzara.
seen that. I should see
It's
that.
an amazing, interesting movie, and very erotic in some of the scenes. And it was just so hard to convince Sean that I wasn't trying to pull some swindle by sneaking material into the magazine that he felt didn't belong there. He felt he was holding the line against the barbarians, and to some degree I was a barbarian. And he made it very hard to write about certain aspects of movies. And nobody has done a good job, really, of writing sustained material on the way that movies affect people erotically, and the fact that they become a popular art because they are a dating game. People love movies for that reason. They excite them sexually, and they go for dates, and they go to learn more about how to behave. There's such a big area there in movies, and I never got a real crack at that. But I dealt with it a tiny bit in The Last Tango piece and Get Out Your Handkerchiefs and a few other movies, but I'd love to have written more about that. Bertrand Blier I really loved writing about because he dealt so much in sexual areas.
How do you see movies now? Do people send you tapes, and do you go to the multiplex nearby? Or
All of those methods.
Mhm.
I do get a number of videos sent to me, and that's fun. A lot of directors whose work I was kind to send me videos when they have new pictures coming out. And surprisingly, a number of people whose work I was not kind to send me videos now because they want my opinion and they know I can't do them any harm. That's a very funny development. But I can get to see most things. And I live in a community that has 4 screens, and they do change pictures pretty fast, so I get to see most of the things I want to. I find it very hard to go see what I still consider to be exploitation movies. I mean, I find that I'm not really eager to go see a lot of the films, and sometimes I have to prod myself to go see them. There are very few pictures that I've seen at the movie house that I've really enjoyed. Most of the things that play in theaters are really bummers. They're the same ones playing across the country because, of course, the movie companies discovered it was more economic to play movies all over at the same time because they could advertise them on television and take care of their advertising that way. And so I see what my sisters in San Francisco see and what people around the country see. It's an awful thing. I remember driving across the country. Every town you came to in a given week was playing the same movies. It's like shopping now internationally, and you buy something and bring it back eagerly, and you walk down the street and there it is for sale at the corner drugstore. But movies now are pretty much the same around the country.
Do you miss having that every other week opportunity to share your perceptions of movies with readers?
Sharing is a nice way of putting it. I loved writing. I loved writing about things when I was excited about them. It's not fun writing about bad movies. I used to think it was bad for my skin. My skin would dry up. It's painful writing about bad things in an art form, particularly when young kids are going to be enthusiastic about those works because they haven't seen anything better or anything different. I mean, if you were writing about the perfect storm, you would have to consider that for many kids it's the first time they've seen something like that, and they're all excited about it, all their buttons are pushed. And they're going to be very angry if they read a review by someone who doesn't respond to it happily. I got a lot of that kind of mail from young moviegoers and high school and college kids who couldn't understand why I wasn't as excited about things like the Towering Inferno as they were. And there are a lot of Towering Infernos coming out all the time. It's amazing. The people on television who got excited last week about The Patriot are getting excited this week about X-Men, and they'll get excited the next week about something else. But if you write critically, you have to do something besides get excited. You have to examine what's in front of you. And what you see is the movie industry in decay, and the decay gets worse and worse.
Well, since 1991, those of us who loved reading you in the New Yorker every other week haven't had that opportunity, and that's why it's been so much fun to talk with you today.
Thank you very much.